Right, I should tell you that every week we do a brilliant new club championship show. You can get it on all of our social media feeds. If you subscribe to YouTube or subscribe to the OTB GAA feed on podcast, you'll get it there. And a reminder, of course, Club GAA on Off the Ball is in partnership with AIB, proud sponsors of the Football, Hurling and Camogie All-Ireland Club Championships. Check out the hashtag The Toughest for more. On Saturday afternoon, Aisling O'Reilly is going to be reporting from Semple Stadium for the Munster Club Hurling final. It's Ballygunner against Ballyea. Throw-ins at 3:15. There'll be updates, of course, with John on the show tomorrow. Now, Ballyea are obviously a powerhouse in Clare hurling. I'm delighted to say Jamesie O'Connor joins to talk to us a little bit about the backstory to how we got here. When you were in your pomp playing club, am I right in saying that Ballyea were still intermediate at that stage?
Yeah, I mean, junior and intermediate, Ger, I think it was 2001 when they finally, I think, won the intermediate championship and got up senior. But it's interesting because Clarecastle Ballyea is actually the same parish, and if you were to go back historically, Stephen Sheedy, for example, that was a brilliant college player with me and Flannan's, played underage with Clare, and Stephen was on the panel in '95. And had knee injury problems. But Stephen would have played with Ballyea in his formative years. I think his father would have been heavily involved in sourcing their field and that. But there was a sense, I think, that in the parish that, if you wanted to play senior hurling, you played with Clarecastle, and Ballyea were nearly seen as the poor relation, maybe even the junior club. So Stephen Sheedy and his brother Martin would have been, integral parts of, that great Clarecastle team in the 1990s. They were a big turn on our side, and were beaten by Bor in an All-Ireland club semi-final by a point, I think, after a replay. And they were a fantastic team. So, Ballyea and Clarecastle, it's an interesting kind of dynamic, and that history is kind of is there. But Ballyea at the moment, I suppose, look at it, a lot of it has to do with the emergence of Tony Kelly, Jack Brown, Ger O'Connor, Paul Flanagan. And a really, really good set of underage players that have taken them to where they are now. They got to a final link in 2003 where actually they were beaten by Clarecastle in the final. And Tony Griffin, obviously, that hurled with me, would have been the main man in that team. And Tony was probably one of the first players. And Robbie Hogan, the current Ballyea manager, is a guy that I would have played underage hurling with Clare with. And Robbie's a great character, but he stayed loyal to Ballyea and didn't go to the dark side or to Clarecastle. but they have become, as you said, a major force. With their first senior title in 2016, and I think this is this year's title is their fourth in that 5 or 6 year period. And certainly when they've been on top, they've capitalised and they've made hay with probably what many people will, within Clare would view as, a golden generation of players. How
big an area are we talking about? I know I'm not asking for the census figures, but roughly what kind of a size would Ballyea be?
Well, it's not a huge parish, Jeremy. I mean, if you're heading kind of west, out of Ennis, whatever, or out the Killyford Road, kind of southwest, Ballyea is kind of out that way. It's kind of left as you're heading out to Lissycasey. But Ballynakelly, which would be further back, Clondegad is their football club, and traditionally the Ballyea guys would have probably played football with Clondegad, maybe another one with Lissycasey, and then the Ballynakelly guys might have played hurling with Ballyea. But going back to when Tony Kelly and Jack Brown and these guys were underage, suddenly there was a link to kind of Kilmehel, and I'm not sure what the roots of all that were, but certainly, the Ballyea parish has been extended westwards, for want of a better way of putting it, and now you've got guys like Pierce Lillis, who I think is from Cura Clare, and a lot of other good footballers that are plying their trade in the Ballyea colours. So they've probably taken advantage of the fact that, I suppose, if you head back to West Clare, there's very, very little, if no hurling, kind of west of Ennis. And I suppose Kilmaley and Ballyea geographically, are the closest clubs, and therefore some of the West Clare guys would play with either of those two parishes,
And that's obviously a rolling ball of momentum then for any young players coming through, or young kids now who dream of being a hurler in Clare, and you're living West Clare, and Ballyea is the place to go. That pendulum is swung.
Yeah, well, Ballyea and Kilmaley probably both have their eyes westward in terms of, I suppose, listen, like Joe Constantine, played midfield on our club team that won the All-Ireland Club back in 1999. Joe's from Cura Clare, the heart of West Clare. But Joe was Joe's a boarder in Flannans, and Joe never picked up a hurley until he came to St. Flannans, whatever, and then befriended some of the lads from our club. He was friendly with them, and whatever conversation was had, suddenly Joe was registered with us as an isolated player, and played underage with us, and went on to become a really, really good, solid, integral part of our team. Myself and Manny Baker in the middle of the field were brilliant for us. So I suppose, look at it's you've always probably had players from West Clare that have plied their trade from a hurling perspective, with clubs, and it's just the way it is. It's geographically, Ballyea and Kilmaley probably are the two most western outposts. And it's Diamond and Aina Kilmona, and it's Diamond, again, have a small hurling club, but all the Aina Kilmona guys at underage would play football in this Diamond. So
right.
So those links are there, and Ballyea have done well at the moment from a lot of good footballers that are good, solid, fit, athletic, mobile players, and they're playing their trade at Ballyea at the moment.
One last thing about this before we get into the nuances of the game itself. You mentioned Tony Griffin staying with them. Was he kind of one of the first high-profile players maybe who didn't make the move? And is that seems like an important moment where you keep your best young players as opposed to being a farm system for the superior, up until that point, club in the area. Yeah,
and I'd probably be lynched, Ger, by the Ballyea contingent for getting half this story kind of wrong, or this kind of history wrong. But yeah, I mean, as I said, certainly Stephen Sheedy and Martin would have played underage with Ballyea, but as I said, Ballyea at that time were probably a junior A club, and I suppose, look at in terms of the parish rule, you were probably eligible. I'm assuming that's still there, that you were eligible to play for Clarecastle. You just had to go through your transfer process or whatever. So Robbie Hogan would have been a very good underage player. The current Ballyea manager, and Robbie would have stayed with Ballyea. So there have been family ties, there have been family links, there might have been relatives that played with Clarecastle. There's probably a whole history, and it's not probably a one sentence answer, Jerry. It's probably more complex than that. But certainly Tony Griffin, Tony was obviously a very good player with Clare, and playing for the club and playing for Ballyea obviously got them up to, or was an integral part of getting them up to the senior ranks. And they got to that county final in, I think it was 2000 and 2003, but they would have been going in as underdogs and coming up against a seasoned, really experienced Clarecastle team. Dalo, I'd say, probably might have started, but he was certainly there and probably came on at some stage and may have started, if I remember correctly. So there would have been a huge amount of experience in their Clarecastle team, and look at they won the game as expected. So it took Ballyea another decade longer to kind of finally make the breakthrough. But with obviously Tony being the player he was, and Jack and Paul and Gudgie and those other good players that they had, there's inevitable that they were going to be a force, and they're thereabouts. And probably picking up those one or two footballers along the way certainly didn't hurt them in terms of getting them over the line when they did finally win their first. And
it's an interesting kind of situation now where that muscularity, that athleticism, I don't know if it's particularly the right way to go about the challenge they face at the weekend when you're up against a Ballygunner side who now have the confidence of getting over the line last year in the remarkable way that they did it. So what kind of a chance do you give Ballyea this weekend?
Well, they're certainly underdogs, Ger. And I mean, when you saw what Ballygunner did to the Parish, I mean, it was some game and some second half performance, because I was watching the game at home with my father, and at half time I said, well, there's only one team going to win this, and I couldn't see the Parish been beaten, especially in the Gaelic grounds. And I thought they'd wrestle them into the match back their way. But what a performance Ballygunner put in that second half, and that probably couldn't have happened, Ger, without the belief and the confidence, and and Darragh Sullivan referenced afterwards that just refusal to kind of panic and make wrong decisions and so on. They just it was a very, very steady, assured, really impressive, hard work and efficient clinical second half, and I certainly didn't see it coming at half time. And that's sometimes what success and that continued success that they've had obviously brings. And it was some performance, and look at Ballyea under no illusions about how difficult the task would be on Saturday, and they'll win as underdogs, but it's still a 2-horse race, and they have a chance.
They are massive underdogs. I've just checked there. It's like 7 points is what the expected margin of victory will be. But at the same time, we do need to talk about Tony Kelly. I remember we had him on in springtime, or maybe at the early part of the championship season, and we were just talking about the difference between summer hurling and winter hurling, and he was making the point that like the ball does travel differently, but that actually he really loves the cold time of the year when you go out and there's just a different feeling in the air. And we've seen him at this time of year. We've seen him in league games rack up massive scores for Clare. We've seen him in these club games rack up massive scores. He's not quite at that free scoring level at the moment for Ballyea, and they don't need him to be for whatever reason, but there's a possibility he might put it together this weekend, and that's what they need, I suppose, if there is going to be an upset.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Ballygunner came to Ennis last year and it was 320 to 2-6. They totally outclassed Ballyea, you know. I mean, look, they were slicker, they were sharper, they were just better all over the field, and probably had the bit between their teeth as well in terms of they looked like a team hell bent on, you know, going the whole way last year, and they really had the bit between their teeth and delivered a performance that reflected that. And you know, Ballyea didn't have Tony, and I mean, for Ballyea even to win Clare last year was a massive achievement, you know, without him, given how important he was. And you know, a bit like this year's county final, you know, they got over the line by a point, not playing particularly well, but staying in the match. And if they're thereabouts, you know, with 10 minutes to go, they've got this ability to close things out. And, you know, just that know-how, that experience, and it even comes from the likes of Gary Brennan. I mean, and Gary didn't play in the earlier rounds of the championship, and McClellan were knocked out of the football. You know, the overtures were made, and back he came, and obviously got the crucial goal, you know, against the Bears the last day out. So it's a big plus to have him back, you know, kind of motoring well as well. But yeah, they're going to need Tony to step up and deliver. I suppose, look at something, you know, performance wise akin to what he did for Clare, you know, so consistently during the summer. And obviously they're going to have to play significantly better than they did last year. But they'll have learned a lot from that, and you know, it's up to them to get their matchups right and try to make it the type of game that they need to make it to win, which is probably low scoring and keeping it tight at the back and finding a way to stay in the match until maybe the last quarter, and then hopefully that they can find a way, you know, to get it done. But you know, on all form, Ger, they still have a lot to do.
Just looking at the forecast there, it's not great on Sunday. It does look like there'll be rain early, but it should be stopping around the time of the match, so it'll be a damp, cold pitch, and that might suit the type of low scoring game that you're talking about there. There is also the case that this may not yet be the full peak of the reigning All-Ireland champions, that actually that bounce in confidence, that bit between their teeth that you were talking about that Ballygunner had last year, that actually they might be in a sweet spot now where there's 2 or 3 years where they're continuously getting better, and so there's not actually that much that Ballyea can do if that's the case.
No, I mean, like, it's up to Ballyea to be as good as they can be, and you know, make every effort to make sure that they have their matchups right, and you know, they don't beat themselves. You know, but you look at that Ballygunner team and you look at the experience. You know, Socky O'Keefe in goal, Barry Coughlin was obviously, you know, huge intercounty experience. Ian Kenny, Pádraig Mahoney was brilliant the last day. Peter Hogan is intercounty experience. You know, Philip Mahoney, Harry Ruddle off the bench. You know, given what the confidence that you know what he can do, you know, from the Nationals final. That's not to mention Desi Hutchinson. So look, they're loaded, and as you said, you know, they have the confidence of having done it last year. You know, they've got the taste of success. These guys want to get back to Croke Park. You know, they want more of it, and you know, like, they know on paper and in all known form they're the better side pound for pound than Ballyea, but they still have to go and take care of business. And there is maybe that fear as well, Ger, that look, they knew the challenge that the Parish were going to bring. They knew they'd have to be at their best to be ready for that, and that's the way it proved to be. And they mightn't be as good, you know, or as efficient or as clinical as they were, you know, on that occasion. And that's certainly what Ballyea will hope be the case. And even talking to Tony and Jack Brown earlier in the year in Clare, when Ballyea weren't necessarily firing all cylinders, the lads themselves would say like that they needed rain, do you know what I mean, and the heavier conditions, you know. So that certainly won't hurt them, because they are fit, they are, you know, mobile, athletic. They've got guys that they work very, very hard. They're very honest. And while, you know, even some of the footballers, Pierce Lillis and that, have limitations, and they're not necessarily going to hit 1-5 or do a Tony Kelly on it, they're team players. And as I said, they bring a lot of honesty, a lot of, you know, genuine work effort, the type of things, Ger, that you need to win this time of the year, the type of things that every successful club team that wins titles needs to have. But they're going to certainly, have to get a performance out of Tony, because it's hard to see them, putting the scores on the board to win unless he really fires on all cylinders.
We did a piece last week with our colleague Arthur James O'Dea, who's written a book, Limerick, a biography in 10. It's a biography about Limerick, and it's about 10 Limerick stories. But the one that we talked about most was Mick Mackey, and the point that Mick Mackey was already at 27, 28, this kind of legendary, iconic figure that people were making songs about, and the songs you kind of needed because there was obviously no footage. And it struck me this last week that, like, that's the age Tony Kelly is, and he's like as legendary. What the stuff that he's been doing is Mick Mackey-esque. Like when Kieran Carey comes out and talks about the Messi of hurling, and he's got a very specific way of like talking Limerick up and saying we are great, we want to be the next Kilkenny. I sometimes wonder if we're like sleeping a little bit on just how amazing Tony Kelly is.
Well, certainly whatever buttons Brian Lohan has pressed since taking over the helm in Clare, he's absolutely got the best out of Tony. And I remember saying, I think in an interview, maybe last year, the year before, that Tony obviously was hurler of the year and young player of the year in 2013, and had all the under 21 success and won the first All Ireland. But I don't think Tony would have been happy, that he hit the heights that he was capable of as consistently in subsequent years. And that's why, the last few years have been brilliant in terms of, Tony realising that potential and playing to the level that we all knew he was capable of. And he did it in flashes. I mean, there were times, Ger, back in 15, 16, 17, 18, when, Tony maybe would hit 4 points from play in 5 minutes, but then maybe struggled to maybe get on the ball and maybe might have had the number of possessions or the impact on the game that he'd like to have had, or you as a Clare supporter maybe would like him to have had. But I mean, his form over the last 2-3 years has been phenomenal. And I mean, that performance in the Munster finals, this year, that sideline cut at the end, I mean, typified, do you know what I mean, what he is in terms of the class and the grace and the athleticism and some of the scores he got that day. And that final score at the end, under the greatest of pressure, to take on the responsibility when, he was looking, I think, to play something short, and then maybe it wasn't on. And, he took on the shot, it had to go over, it was game over. And to nail that from that angle, I mean, it was just incredible. And, he has been just exceptional and a joy to watch if you're a Clare supporter, Ger, over the last 2 or 3 years. And we're certainly hoping that there's more left in him and there's more left in the tank. But he has worked incredibly hard, I think, under Brian, do you know what I mean, to deliver those performances. That just doesn't happen without the work been put in behind the scenes, and I think Tony has certainly done that. And it's just great that he's seen the rewards on the field and got his rewards. And hopefully, he might have added to silverware. Obviously in the last couple of years we've been getting closer, ever closer. But hopefully, 2023 now we might just finally get over the line and get some silverware again.
Yeah, and I hope that there's crossover appeal there that is capitalised on too, because he's definitely the type of person who will bring people from, like, Tony Kelly's genius is not in any way a secret to hurling folk or even to casual GAA fans, but like, he's got that kind of Shane Walsh box office appeal that, the whole country erupted on Shane Walsh buzz after the All-Ireland final, but he'd been talked about for years as well too. So I don't really know what I'm saying here, but if you get the opportunity to stop and watch Tony Kelly on Sunday, people should take it. I suppose that's the long and the short of it. I guess you're predicting a win for the reigning All-Ireland champions. If I was to ask you for a prediction, are you?
I think so, Jerry. Yeah, I mean, I said 320 to 2-6 last year, admittedly without Tony, and Ballyea. I think maybe the belief wasn't there. Maybe the batteries were a bit low, and maybe they felt that winning Clare was the extent of maybe their ambitions for the season. But they have players back. Ger O'Connor, Gucci was in America. He's back. He's an experienced player. He would have grown up hurling with Tony, Jack Brown, Paul Flanagan. He's back in the mix. They have a couple of other players that were on the fringes of the panel, maybe that were injured last year and have been available. So they're not without hope. And as I said, if Tony, his form, if they can contain Desi, and Desi had only scored last year, and Paul Flanagan had a great year for Clare. Jack Brown, Jack is obviously experienced at the back. If they can don't concede goals, don't concede don't concede frees, which is easier said than done. Score their frees at the other end, and if Tony has a big day, then they have a chance. But realistically, Ballygunner are, they're a class side, and they beat a class side that had the same All-Ireland pedigree in the Parish. And you have to say that, it looks like Ballyhale on one side and Ballygunner on the other look set for another rematch potentially down the line, and that certainly whets certain people's appetites as well, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think there's going to be any bad games between now and the All-Ireland final as well. There's still plenty of negotiation to be done to get there, but Jamesie, we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks a million.
Cheers, Ger.
It's Jamesie O'Connor there giving us a preview of that game on Sunday. Ballygunner against Ballyea, throws in at 3:15, and as I said, Aisling O'Reilly will be at the game for Off the Ball. A reminder, Club GA on OTB is in partnership with AIB, proud sponsors of the Football, Hurling and Camogie All-Ireland Club Championships. Check out the hashtag The Toughest for more. Of course, it's a biography of 9 lives, not 10 lives. I managed to butcher that there. So anyway, you knew that, didn't you? Right. That is our hurling preview done.